I then create a new layer on top of the others and start filling out the areas where the light source would hit with the yellow. For the shading, I unhide the poser reference because these need to be more precise than the highlights. Once the shading placement is decided, you'll instantly know where the highlights would be, whether you have a reference for it or not. Creating a new layer, I pick my color blue again and start drawing out the shades on the trees, making sure to keep the branches and bark texture in mind, as some areas pop out further and would have a hint of light to them. I decide I want the foreground to be much darker than the area where the archer is standing, as the focus of the drawing will be drawn to him due to the light, whereas the female characters will further be hidden with the background if there is more shade there. Once the shading is complete, I hide the poser reference layer and select the layer that holds the shade, lowering the opacity way down so it doesn't hide my sketch lines. We can now move on to the characters. The problem now is that we've resized the characters several times so the sketch doesn't fit on top of the 3D models anymore. This is alright because we can simply hide the character sketch and use the poser reference to the fullest by drawing the shade on top of the poser reference directly. Since we'll need to resize these individually, you want to make sure to draw each character shade on a separate layer. Once having completed the shade on top of the poser reference, we can hide that layer, bring back the character sketch and select the shade layer. Holding down Shift and pressing down the letter T on my keyboard, I can now resize the shade according to the sketch's shape. You want to make sure you keep Shift pressed down or else the shade will shape out of proportion. Once it's approximately placed where it should be, erase the areas where the shade is pushed out of the sketch lines and draw shades on the areas that weren't there on the 3D models, such as the branches, leaves, and hair. The light source shouldn't be too hard to figure out on those elements that don't have a reference, as you have a solid base around it to reference from. After repeating the same process on the other 3 female characters, we can move on to the male character. This one is a little trickier since he's got clothing and those aren't present at all in the poser reference.